that I wanted to talk about that was very important for me was MSCI 252, which was probability and statistics for engineers. And I chose to approach this presentation by actually starting to try to explain one of the key principles that I found very useful, and then I'll talk about how I applied that in work. So one of the important things that we learn is this idea of statistical significance. And a very common application of this, especially in the tech world, is something called A/B testing, which you may or may not have heard of. So in A/B testing, companies are basically looking to compare two different experiences, so say A and B, and they're trying to see which one is better, maybe which one users prefer. So what do? Well, they take their users and they basically randomly allocate them to one of the two experiences. So let's say half the group goes into A and half the group goes into B. And then they try to understand and measure the behavior of the users. And there's lots of different measures that exist, but one really common one is something called click-through rate. So you can have a click-through rate for A and for B. And so to give a bit more insight into what click-through rate might be, it's what percentage of the people that arrive at experience A actually then perform a particular action. So maybe it's something like clicking the buy now button, right? So that's kind of what we mean when we say click-through rates. So let's say you're in a company, you're running a test like this, and the click-through rate for A is, let's say, 13%, and the click-through rate for B is 10%. Well, does that mean that A is necessarily better than B? Before the stats course, I would have been like, yes, of course, like it's higher than 10%, therefore it's better. But what I learned in stats is that there's this concept of hypothesis testing. So what that means is you start off with a null hypothesis. So we say, let's say that the null hypothesis is that both the rates are the same. So that 10% in both cases, that's the null hypothesis. And if you have a null and that's not true, then you need some sort of alternative. So maybe your alternative is that the click-through rate for A is actually going to be greater than the click-through rate for B. So I have covered some statistics there. I'm going to simplify sort of the rest of this process. So what essentially happens is you use math and you calculate something called a p-value. And that p-value is telling you what is the probability that we would observe 13% and 10% if our null hypothesis, that the two rates were the same, was true. And if you have a really low p-value, what that tells us is that we can reject the null hypothesis. It doesn't mean that we can confirm that our alternative hypothesis is true, but we know that our null is not true. Okay, so probably scared you enough. That was enough of a first year lecture. But the reason that I wanted to explain it is because this is basically what I got to go do in work. So in my fourth and actually fifth co-op as well, I worked in the Bay Area at a company called Tile. And Tile creates Bluetooth-enabled tracking devices. So I know the white doesn't look too great, but these are the four products that they have are part of their product line. So what you do with those is you clip them onto your keys, you put them in your wallet, and then you have a mobile application that essentially lets you track the location of those items. So if you've misplaced your keys, you look on the app and you can find them. And one of the really cool projects that Tile was taking on when I was there for co-op was that they wanted to launch a subscription offering because they wanted some sort of recurring revenue stream. So what I mean by that is they wanted to have software features that they could charge people monthly or annually to have. So one of the features, for example, might be something like, I have this tile for my keys and I want to be able to share it with, say, my friend or my roommate. So one of the things that we did is actually ran A/B tests to determine some of the features of this. And in specific, there were three things that we looked at. So we looked at the price. What price were people willing to pay for this sort of offering? We looked at the length of the free trial. So if we offer people this free for 60 days versus 30 days, do we see any difference in how many people decide to purchase? And we looked at the feature set. If we have 3 features that we really have ready right now, or if we had 7 features which we can have ready in 6 months, does that change if people are going to buy? And so that goes back to the A/B testing that I talked about earlier. So you put this up, you have real users go and interact with this page, and you see how many people actually click to purchase. And based on that, you can see if the results are actually meaningful, statistically significant, and you can then draw conclusions as to what your price should be, what your free trial or what your feature set should be.